While you steal, I build plans. The sound of Vanessa's heels clicking across our hardwood floor at 2 in the morning had become as familiar as my morning coffee. 3 weeks of late client meetings and emergency showings had turned our bedroom into a revolving door of lies wrapped in Chanel perfume and guilt. I sat in my basement workshop pretending to organize socket wrenches while listening to her stumble through what she probably thought was a stealthy entrance. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built this workshop to fix things. And here I was, surrounded by tools that couldn't repair the one thing that mattered most. "Rick, you down there?" Her voice carried that practice sweetness she used with difficult clients. Funny how I'd become one of those. "Yeah, just finishing up some paperwork." I set down a wrench and climbed the creaking stairs. Each step a countdown to another performance we'd both gotten too good at. Vanessa stood in our kitchen, still in her black cocktail dress, makeup slightly smudged. She looked beautiful and guilty in equal measure. A combination that used to drive me crazy in the best way. Now it just drove me crazy. "How was the networking event?" I asked, opening the refrigerator and grabbing a beer. "Meet anyone interesting?" "Oh, you know how these real estate things go. Bunch of suits talking about market trends and mortgage rates." She kicked off her heels and padded toward me in stockings. "Sorry I'm so late. Time just got away from me." Time has a way of doing that. I twisted off the bottle cap, the small pop echoing in the silence between us. "Especially when you're having fun." Her laugh came out forced. "Fun? Rick, it was work. Boring. Necessary work that pays for this house and your precious garage. My precious garage that you've been encouraging me to sell for months." "That's not, I never said sell it. I said maybe consider expanding, bringing in a partner." She moved closer, running her fingers along my forearm. "We could really build something together." The word together hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I took a long pull from my beer and studied her face. Vanessa had always been beautiful, but lately there was something different in her eyes. A restlessness that made her look right through me, even when she was looking at me. "Speaking of building things together," I said, "Billy mentioned he saw you at Murphy's pub last Thursday. Said you were with some guy in an expensive suit. Thought that was interesting since you told me you were showing the Henderson property until 9. Her hand stopped moving on my arm. Billy needs to mind his own business. And yes, I did stop by Murphy's after the showing. I met a potential client there, Chad Bowers. He's looking for investment properties downtown. Chad Bowers. I let the name roll around in my mouth like I was tasting wine. Sounds like a guy who'd wear expensive suits to dive bars. It's networking, Rick. You should try it sometime instead of hiding in your garage, covered in motor oil and self-pity. There it was, the real Vanessa. Sharp as broken glass when cornered. I'd fallen in love with that edge once back when it was directed at other people's stupidity instead of mine. You're right, I said, setting down my beer. Maybe I should get out more, meet new people, learn about investment opportunities. Something flickered across her face. Relief mixed with suspicion. That's great, honey. I think you'd really, in fact, why don't I join you next time? I'd love to meet this Chad guy. Compare notes on downtown properties. The color drained from her cheeks like water from a broken sink. Oh, well, I don't think that would be appropriate. These are professional meetings and bringing spouses might send the wrong message. What message would that be? That I'm not serious about my career. That I need my husband to hold my hand during business meetings. Her voice was rising, defensive. I've worked too hard to build my reputation to have it undermined by your husband caring about what you do for a living. By my husband not trusting me to do my job. The words exploded between us like a backfiring engine. We stared at each other across our kitchen. The same kitchen where we'd planned our future over morning coffee. Where she'd kissed me goodbye every day for 6 years. Where we'd slow dance to music from the radio while dinner burned on the stove. Trust, I repeated quietly. Funny word choice. Vanessa's expression softened, and for a moment, I saw the woman I'd married, vulnerable, uncertain, maybe even sorry. Rick, I know things have been strange lately. The real estate market is crazy right now, and I'm under Southwest much pressure to close deals. I've been distracted and probably not the best wife. Stop. I held up my hand. Don't apologize for being distracted. Don't apologize for working late. Heck, don't even apologize for lying about where you've been. I haven't been lying. Just don't apologize for not loving me anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she whispered, "Rick, I do love you." "No," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "You love the idea of me. You love having someone to come home to when Chad Bowers gets boring. You love having a safety net while you figure out what you really want. That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about the joint savings account that's been hemorrhaging money. Let's talk about the credit card charges at restaurants I've never been to. Let's talk about the hotel receipts I found in your purse." Her face went white. "You went through my purse?" "I was looking for aspirin. Found a lot more than I bargained for." I pulled the crumpled receipts from my pocket and dropped them on the kitchen counter. The Marriott downtown. 3 different nights last month. Room service for 2, champagne, the works. Vanessa stared at the receipts like they might burst into flames. "I can explain." "I'm sure you can. You're good at explaining things, but here's what I can explain. Why I'm standing here having this conversation instead of throwing your stuff out on the lawn. Because you love me, too. Because I'm an idiot." I finished my beer and set the bottle down harder than necessary. "But I'm a learning idiot." "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked at my wife. Really looked at her. The woman who'd promised to love me in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse. Apparently, she'd found something better. It means I'm done pretending this is something it's not. It means I'm done being the understanding husband while you figure out your feelings. And it means I'm definitely done paying for hotel rooms where you and Chad can figure them out together. Rick, please let me explain what really happened. Save it for someone who still believes your stories. I walked toward the stairs, then stopped and turned back. "Oh, and Vanessa, next time you decide to cheat on your husband, maybe don't use the joint credit card. It's tacky." I left her standing in the kitchen, surrounded by evidence of her betrayal and the wreckage of whatever we used to be. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I could hear her crying, soft, broken sobs that might have moved me a week ago. Now, they just sounded like the soundtrack to the end of my marriage. 3 days passed in a strange kind of limbo. Vanessa moved through our house like a ghost, making coffee she didn't drink and starting conversations she couldn't finish. I went to work, came home, ate dinner, and pretended to watch television while she pretended to read real estate magazines. We were like actors who'd forgotten our lines, improvising our way through a play neither of us wanted to be in. On Thursday morning, everything changed. I was at the garage, elbow deep in the engine of Mrs. Patterson's ancient Honda when Billy walked over with an expression I'd learned to recognize over our 15-year friendship. It was the same look he'd worn when he told me my dad had been asking around town about borrowing money and when he'd mentioned seeing Vanessa at Murphy's pub. Billy had a gift for delivering bad news with the gentle precision of a surgeon. "Rick, we need to talk." I straightened up, wiping my hands on a rag that had seen better decades. "Let me guess. You saw Vanessa somewhere she shouldn't have been with someone she shouldn't have been with doing something she shouldn't have been doing." Worse, Billy pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. I saw this. It was a Facebook post from Sienna Crawford, Vanessa's best friend since college and professional enabler of bad decisions. The photo showed Vanessa and a man I didn't recognize sitting close together in what looked like an expensive restaurant. Very close together. The caption read, "When your girl finds her happiness. So proud of V for following her heart. Hesh her new beginnings. Hush, her love wins." The man in the photo was exactly what I'd expected Chad Bowers to look like. Mid-30s, perfectly styled hair. The kind of confident smile that came from never having to change his own oil or wonder if he could afford groceries and rent in the same month. He wore a suit that probably cost more than I made in a week. And his arm was draped around my wife like he owned her. When was this posted? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. 2 hours ago. Rick, I'm sorry, man. I know this has got to be it's perfect. I handed him back the phone and returned to Mrs. Patterson's engine. Now I know exactly what I'm dealing with. What do you mean? I mean, I've been playing defense when I should have been playing offense. I located the problem, a loose connection that had been causing the engine to misfire, and tightened it with more force than strictly necessary. Hand me that socket wrench, will you? Billy grabbed the tool, but didn't hand it over immediately. Rick, what are you thinking? Because I know that look, and it usually ends with someone getting hurt or arrested. Nobody's getting hurt, but somebody might get educated. That's what I was afraid of. I took the wrench and made the final adjustment to Mrs. Patterson's engine. Start her up, I called out. The Honda roared to life, purring like a satisfied cat. Sometimes fixing things was exactly that simple. Find the problem, tighten the connection, restore the proper function. Sometimes it was more complicated. Billy, I need you to do me a favor. Can you handle things here for a couple hours? Where are you going? To make some new friends. An hour later, I was sitting in my truck outside Chad Bauer's apartment building, a sleek glass monument to gentrification in what used to be the warehouse district. According to the internet, Chad worked for some financial consulting firm that specialized in disruptive investment strategies and maximizing portfolio synergies. In other words, he moved money around and used big words to justify charging people for the privilege. His LinkedIn profile was a masterpiece of corporate speak and humble bragging. MBA from a school I'd never heard of but was apparently supposed to be impressed by. Hobbies included extreme fitness challenges and curating unique dining experiences. The kind of guy who said curating when he meant eating and thought paying $50 for a steak made him sophisticated. I was studying his headshot all teeth and hair product when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hey, stranger. Heard you might be single soon. Coffee later. Zoxo Melissa. I hadn't thought about her in months. We dated briefly after high school, stayed friendly over the years, exchanged Christmas cards, and the occasional social media comment. She was divorced now, working as a nurse at the hospital, raising 2 kids on her own. Nice woman, pretty uncomplicated. The fact that she'd heard about my marriage troubles meant the news was spreading faster than I'd expected. In a town this size, secrets had a half-life of about 24 hours. And apparently my 24 hours were up. I was typing a polite response when Chad Bowers emerged from his building. He looked exactly like his photos, only more so. The suit was charcoal gray and fit him like it had been painted on. His shoes were leather and probably Italian. His hair was the kind of perfect that required professional maintenance and multiple products. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who'd never had to worry about money. Never had to choose between fixing his car and paying his electric bill. Never had to wonder if the woman he loved was thinking about someone else. I hated him immediately and completely. Chad walked to a silver BMW parked in the building's reserved section and spent a full minute checking his reflection in the driver's side window. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his hair, and practiced what looked like a smile he'd been working on. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. Even from across the street, I could see him laughing at whatever the person on the other end was saying. His whole body language changed, more animated, more intimate. He leaned against his car like he was settling in for a long conversation. I rolled down my window and heard fragments of his side of the call. Can't wait to see you tonight. That little place you mentioned. Don't worry about him, baby. Baby. He called my wife. Baby. The conversation lasted another 5 minutes. Chad spent most of it grinning and nodding like an idiot, occasionally running his hand through his perfect hair. When he finally hung up, he stood there for a moment with a satisfied expression like a cat who just caught a particularly fat mouse. Then he got in his BMW and drove away. I sat in my truck for a long time after he left, thinking about the conversation I'd just witnessed, the casual intimacy in his voice, the way he had dismissed me with 4 words. Don't worry about him. Like I was a minor inconvenience, a problem that had already been solved. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Melissa. Rick, you okay? I know this must be a hard time. I stared at her message, then at Chad's building, then at the wedding ring I was still wearing out of habit more than hope. Melissa was offering comfort, companionship, maybe something more. Chad was offering my wife a life I couldn't compete with. Expensive restaurants, luxury apartments, the kind of financial security that turned love into a business transaction. But I was offering something neither of them had considered: consequences. I started my truck and drove home, already planning my next move. If Vanessa wanted to play games, I'd teach her the rules. If Chad wanted to treat me like an obstacle, I'd show him what obstacles could do. And if they thought this was going to be easy, they were about to learn how wrong two people could be. The bank manager's office smelled like cheap air freshener and broken dreams. Janet Morrison had been handling small business accounts at First National for as long as I'd been running my garage. And in all those years, I'd never seen her look as uncomfortable as she did right now. "Rick, I'm really sorry about this," she said, sliding a folder across her desk. "I tried calling yesterday, but it went straight to voicemail." I opened the folder and felt my stomach drop into my boots. Account statements, withdrawal slips, signature cards, all bearing my name and handwriting that looked exactly like mine but wasn't. Someone had systematically emptied our joint savings account over the past 2 weeks, pulling out just under the daily limit each time to avoid triggering automatic alerts. $18,000, I said more to myself than to Janet. Gone. The signatures match what we have on file, Janet said carefully. And the person who made the withdrawals knew your mother's maiden name, your first pet's name, all the security questions. Of course they did. Vanessa knew everything about me. Every password, every security question, every financial detail of our shared life. I trusted her with all of it because that's what married people did. They trusted each other. "I need to see the security footage," I said. Janet shifted uncomfortably. "Rick, I can't just Janet, someone stole $18,000 from my account using forged signatures. Either you show me the footage or I call the police and they get a warrant to see it. Either way, I'm seeing that footage." She sighed and picked up her phone. "Give me a few minutes." 20 minutes later, I was staring at a grainy black and white monitor that showed the bank's interior from last Tuesday afternoon. The time stamp read 2:40 p.m., exactly when I'd been installing a new transmission in Dave Kowalski's pickup truck with Billy and 2 customers as witnesses. The woman on the screen looked like Vanessa from behind. Same height, same build, same dark hair. She wore sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low. But when she turned to sign the withdrawal slip, I caught a glimpse of her profile. It was definitely my wife. But she wasn't alone. A man stood behind her just out of the camera's direct view. I could see his arm, his expensive suit jacket, the edge of his perfectly styled hair. Chad Bowers playing lookout while my wife cleaned out our life savings. "I need copies of everything," I told Janet. "The statements, the signature cards, the security footage." "Rick, I have to ask. Are you planning to press charges?" I thought about it. Vanessa was still legally my wife, and in Maine, spouses had certain rights to joint accounts. A good lawyer could probably argue that she hadn't technically stolen anything, but the forged signatures were another matter entirely. "I'm planning to explore my options," I said finally. Janet nodded and started making copies. While I waited, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Detective Mike Harris. We'd gone to high school together, and he'd brought his patrol car to my garage for oil changes and minor repairs for the past 5 years. More importantly, he owed me a favor from the time I'd fixed his personal truck on a Sunday night Southwest he could drive his daughter to a college interview the next morning. "Harris," he answered on the second ring. "Mike, it's Rick Malloy. I need some advice. Personal or professional?" "Both. Meet me at Murphy's in an hour. First beer's on you." Murphy's pub at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon was exactly what you'd expect. Dim lighting, sticky floors, and the kind of regulars who treated the place like a second home. Mike Harris sat in a corner booth, still in uniform, but off duty, nursing a Budweiser, and looking like a man who'd seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. I slid the folder across the table and watched his expression change as he flipped through the contents. "Jesus, Rick, how long has this been going on?" "The affair? Couple months, maybe longer." "The theft?" 2 weeks. And you're sure it's her? I pulled out my phone and showed him the Facebook photo Sienna had posted. That's Chad Bowers, her new boyfriend. Financial consultant, drives a silver BM, lives in the Meridian Towers downtown. He was with her at the bank. Mike studied the photo, then the security footage stills Janet had printed for me. This is enough for charges, you know, forgery, theft, conspiracy. She could do serious time. I know, but you don't want to press charges. I didn't say that. Mike leaned back in his booth and gave me the look he probably reserved for suspects who were lying to him. Rick, I've known you since we were 15 years old. You're not the vindictive type. You're not going to put your wife in prison no matter what she's done. He was right, and we both knew it, but that didn't mean I was going to let her get away with it. What if I told you I had a better idea? I'd say I don't want to hear it, but you're going to tell me anyway. I took a long pull from my beer and looked around Murphy's, the same bar where Vanessa had met Chad, where she'd started this whole mess. The same bar where half the town came to drink and gossip and pretend their lives weren't falling apart. What if instead of sending her to prison, I just made sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person she really is? Rick, think about it, Mike. Vanessa's whole life is built on image. Perfect house, perfect job, perfect reputation. She's the golden girl of Coastal really. The woman everyone trusts to handle their biggest investment. What happens when word gets out that she's a thief and a cheater? Mike was quiet for a long moment, turning his beer bottle in slow circles on the table. You're talking about destroying her career. I'm talking about telling the truth. Same thing in this case. Is that a problem? Legally? No. Morally? He shrugged. That's between you and your conscience. I thought about the $18,000 Vanessa and Chad had stolen. Money I'd saved over 3 years. Money that was supposed to be the down payment on the bigger garage I'd been dreaming about. Money that represented every extra hour I'd worked and every luxury I'd skipped. I thought about the hotel receipts, the lies, the way she'd looked right through me while planning her escape to a better life. I thought about Chad Bowers calling her baby and telling her not to worry about me. My conscience is fine with it, I said. Mike finished his beer and stood up. Then you don't need my advice. You've already made up your mind. Actually, I do need your advice. I need to know how to do this without breaking any laws. Rick. Mike. She stole $18,000 from me. She forged my signature, cleaned out our savings, and she's probably planning to disappear with her boyfriend as soon as she figures out how to get her hands on the rest of our assets. I'm not asking you to help me break the law. I'm asking you to help me use it. He sat back down. Okay, he said finally. But we do this smart and we do it clean. No vigilante BAS, no revenge fantasies, just good old-fashioned consequences for bad decisions. Deal. And Rick, when this is over, you press charges. All of them. She doesn't get to steal from you and walk away just because you used to love her. I nodded, though we both knew I hadn't decided that yet. Love was a hard habit to break, even when it was ending you. But revenge was easy. The plan came together over the weekend like a well-tuned engine. Each piece fitting perfectly into place, every moving part synchronized with the others. By Monday morning, I was ready to start the machine. Step 1 was the easiest. I drove to Coastal Really and walked into the gleaming office where Vanessa had built her reputation on charm and competence. The receptionist, a young woman named Ashley, who'd always been friendly when Vanessa and I attended office parties, looked surprised to see me. Rick, how are you? Is Vanessa expecting you? Actually, I was hoping to speak with Mr. Davidson. Robert Davidson was the broker who owned the agency, a straight-laced man in his 60s who'd built his business on old-fashioned values and small-town trust. Is everything okay? Just some paperwork issues I need to sort out. Nothing urgent. Ashley buzzed Davidson's office and 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a 1950s business manual. Gray suit, conservative tie, handshake firm enough to crack walnuts. Rick, good to see you. How's the garage business? Can't complain. Mr. Davidson, I need to ask you about something and it's a little awkward. His expression shifted to professional concern. What can I help you with? I pulled out the bank statements and security footage stills. Someone's been forging my signature and stealing money from my accounts. The bank's investigation shows the thefts happened during business hours, and I'm trying to establish alibis for everyone who had access to my financial information. Davidson's face went pale as he studied the documents. Rick, you're not suggesting that someone here? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just being thorough. The police recommended I talk to anyone who might have had access to my personal information. It was a lie, but a believable one. Davidson spent the next 20 minutes pulling employment records and scheduling information, trying to prove that none of his agents could have been involved. When he got to Vanessa's schedule, his frown deepened. This shows Vanessa was out of the office last Tuesday afternoon. He said she was showing the Morrison property to a client, but he trailed off checking his computer. There's no appointment logged and the Morrisons are out of town this week. Probably just a paperwork oversight, I said, but we both knew it wasn't. Davidson was quiet for a long moment, staring at the security footage, still that clearly showed my wife's profile. Rick, I think we need to have a more serious conversation. Step 2 happened that afternoon. I called Chad Bauer's office and identified myself as a potential client interested in an investment opportunities. His assistant, clearly impressed by the size of the fictional portfolio I described, scheduled a meeting for the next day. Mr. Bowers is very excited to discuss your needs. She said he specializes in high-yield opportunities for clients with significant liquid assets. I'll bet he does, I thought. Step 3 required help. I drove to Billy's house after work and found him in his backyard grilling burgers and drinking beer while his kids played on a swing set he'd built himself. Billy had the kind of life I'd thought I was building with Vanessa. Simple, honest, rooted in real things that couldn't be stolen or destroyed by someone else's selfishness. I need a favor, I said, accepting the beer he offered. Does it involve me getting arrested? Not if we do it right. Billy flipped a burger and gave me his full attention. I'm listening. I explained the plan, watching his expression change from skepticism to understanding to something that might have been admiration. You know this is going to blow up your marriage completely. He said, my marriage is already blown up. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. And you're sure this is what you want? Because once you pull this trigger, there's no taking it back. I thought about the $18,000. I thought about the hotel receipts. I thought about Chad Bowers calling my wife baby and telling her not to worry about me. I'm sure. The next morning, I put on my best shirt and drove to Chad's office building. His firm occupied the entire 15th floor of a glass tower downtown, all modern furniture and abstract art, and the kind of aggressive minimalism that was supposed to convey success. Chad Bowers looked exactly like I'd expected. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, perfect suit, perfect handshake. He led me into a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the harbor. Mr. Malloy, I understand you're interested in diversifying your investment portfolio. That's right. I've got about $200,000 in liquid assets that aren't working as hard as they could be. His eyes lit up like a slot machine hitting jackpot. That's exactly the kind of forward thinking that separates successful people from everyone else. Tell me, what's your risk tolerance? For the next hour, Chad pitched me on various investment schemes, each one more aggressive than the last. He used terms like disruptive market positioning and leveraged growth strategies with the confidence of a man who'd never had to explain to his wife why the checking account was overdrawn. The beauty of these opportunities, he said, leaning forward conspiratorially, is that they're not available to everyone. You have to know the right people, have access to the right information. Speaking of the right people, I said, I think you know my wife, Vanessa Malloy, she's in real estate. The change in his expression was subtle but unmistakable. A flicker of surprise followed by calculation followed by what looked like panic. Vanessa, yes, I think we've met at some networking events. Small world. It really is. In fact, she mentioned you might be looking for investment properties. Maybe we could work together on something. I'd have to check my current portfolio allocations. No rush. Why don't you talk to Vanessa about it? I'm sure she'd love to discuss it with you. Chad's perfect composure was cracking like paint on a hot day. Mr. Malloy, I should probably mention that you're sleeping with my wife. I stood up and straightened my tie. Yeah, I figured that out. Thanks for the investment advice, Chad. I'll be in touch. I left him sitting in his conference room, probably wondering how much I knew and what I planned to do about it. Let him wonder. Fear was a powerful motivator and I wanted him motivated. Step 4 was the most satisfying. That evening, I created a Facebook account under a fake name and started posting in the local community groups, the kind of places where news traveled fast and gossip was currency. Does anyone know anything about Chad Bowers from Pinnacle Financial? Thinking about investing with him, but heard some concerning rumors about his business practices. Anyone else notice how many married women have been networking with Chad Bowers lately? Asking for a friend. PSA. If you're thinking about using Coastal Really, you might want to ask about their agent's personal ethics. Just saying. I didn't name names or make specific accusations. I didn't have to. In a town this size, people would connect the dots themselves and their imaginations would fill in any gaps I left. By Thursday, my phone was ringing constantly. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers who'd heard the rumors and wanted to know if they were true. I played it perfectly, hurt but dignified, betrayed but not bitter, more concerned about warning others than seeking revenge. I don't want to get into details, I told everyone who asked. I'm just focusing on moving forward and protecting myself financially. It was exactly the right tone, sympathetic, mature, and just vague enough to let people draw their own conclusions. The conclusions they drew were devastating. By Friday, Vanessa's phone was ringing, too. Clients canceling appointments, colleagues asking uncomfortable questions of friends who'd heard the rumors and wanted to know if she was okay. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She came home that evening looking like she'd been hit by a truck. Rick, we need to talk. I'm listening. People are saying things, terrible things about me, and she couldn't even say Chad's name. What kind of things? You know what kind of things? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Is this because of what happened with the bank account? What happened with the bank account? Is that you stole $18,000 from me? I was going to pay it back with what? Chad's money. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Rick, I know how this looks, but it's not what you think. Chad and we're just friends. Business associates. Business associates who share hotel rooms. How did you? She stopped herself, but it was too late. How did I know about the hotels? The same way I know about the restaurants, the gifts, the lies you've been telling me for months. The same way I know you've been planning to leave me as soon as you figure out how to take half of everything I've worked for. Vanessa sank into a chair, all the fight going out of her at once. I never meant for it to happen this way, but it did. Happen this way. And now you get to live with the consequences. What do you want from me, Rick? What do I have to do to fix this? I looked at my wife. Really looked at her. The woman I'd loved, trusted, built a life with. The woman who'd thrown it all away for a man in an expensive suit who called her baby and helped her steal from her own husband. I want you to pack your things and get out of my house. I want you to stay away from my business, my friends, and my life. And I want you to understand that this is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Rick, please. I'm done. Vanessa, we're done. The only question now is whether you leave quietly or whether I press charges for the theft. She stared at me for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. Then she nodded and walked upstairs to pack. I sat in my kitchen listening to her move around our bedroom, opening drawers and closets, dismantling the life we'd built together, one piece at a time. It should have felt like victory, but it just felt like loss. But sometimes loss was the price of self-respect. And sometimes self-respect was all you had left.